At my brother-in-law's 25th wedding anniversary celebration in Nashville, my wife told her sister she still dreams about her ex every night, not me. I never expected to overhear something that would completely shatter everything I thought I knew about our 8-year marriage. The anniversary party was supposed to be a celebration of lasting love, held at this beautiful country club overlooking the Cumberland River, with about 80 family members and friends gathered to honor David and Margaret's silver anniversary. I was working as a marketing director for a mid-sized tech company. Vanessa taught 3rd grade at an elementary school in our neighborhood, and we'd been looking forward to this weekend getaway to Nashville as a chance to reconnect after a particularly stressful few months where my work projects had been demanding and her school year had been especially challenging with difficult parents and budget cuts. The evening started perfectly. I'd given what I thought was a heartfelt toast about commitment and partnership that had everyone raising their glasses and wiping away tears, and Vanessa seemed genuinely proud as she squeezed my hand during the sustained applause, whispering, "That was beautiful, honey," in my ear. But everything changed when I walked back to the gift table to grab my jacket and found myself standing directly behind Vanessa and her sister Rebecca near the elaborate champagne fountain that Margaret had insisted on renting. The crowd was cheering loudly for the anniversary couple's first dance to "The Way You Look Tonight," and Vanessa clearly thought the combination of music and crowd noise would cover her voice when she leaned close to Rebecca and whispered urgently, "I have to tell someone this before I completely lose my mind. I dream about Carter every single night, Becca. Every single night. I wake up thinking about him, wondering what he's doing, imagining conversations with him, not Marcus, and I honestly don't know what that means about my marriage anymore." Rebecca looked absolutely shocked and glanced around nervously before responding in a hushed but firm tone. "Vanessa, you can't say things like that out loud. You're married. Marcus is a genuinely good guy who loves you." But Vanessa continued, her voice barely audible above the music but crystal clear to me standing just feet away. "I know he's good, but good isn't the same as being right for each other, is it? Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I only married him because I was terrified of being alone after Carter ended things to focus completely on his medical residency." I stood there completely frozen, holding my jacket in my hands, feeling like someone had just delivered a devastating blow to my chest while my wife confessed to her sister that our entire marriage might be built on her fear of loneliness rather than any genuine love for me. Instead of confronting her immediately or making a scene at David and Margaret's special celebration, I quietly stepped back into the crowd and pretended to check my phone messages, my mind racing as I tried to process what I'd just overheard. Carter, her college boyfriend who'd broken up with her 8 years ago to focus entirely on medical school without distractions. The guy she'd mentioned maybe 3 or 4 times in our entire relationship, always casually, always framed as ancient history that didn't matter anymore. The rest of the evening became this completely surreal performance where I had to smile and make polite small talk with relatives and family friends while my wife spent the entire remaining hours being unusually affectionate toward me, almost desperately overcompensating with public displays of affection that now felt completely hollow and calculated rather than genuine. She kept touching my arm during conversations with cousins, laughing a little too loudly at my mediocre jokes, and introducing me to people we just met as my amazing husband Marcus, in a way that felt rehearsed and performative rather than natural. But I also started noticing things I'd somehow missed before, how she checked her phone constantly throughout the evening, sometimes stepping away to the bathroom or outside onto the terrace claiming she needed fresh air or had to check something quickly, and how distracted and almost uncomfortable she seemed during conversations with David and Margaret about their secret to a successful 25-year marriage. When Margaret mentioned that truly successful marriages require choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard, I watched Vanessa's face carefully and saw something that looked unmistakably like guilt and discomfort flash across her expression before she forced a bright smile and nodded enthusiastically while saying, "Absolutely, that's so wise." The drive back to our hotel that night was unusually quiet, with Vanessa claiming she was completely exhausted from all the socializing and family interactions, but I caught her staring out the passenger window with this distant, almost wistful expression that I realized I'd probably seen before but never really paid attention to or questioned. That night, lying in the hotel bed next to her while she fell asleep easily, I couldn't stop thinking about her confession to Rebecca and wondering how long she'd been feeling this way, how many other nights over the past 8 years she'd fallen asleep thinking about another man while I believed we were building something real and meaningful together. Over the following weeks after returning home from Nashville, I became increasingly suspicious of Vanessa's dramatically increased phone usage and discovered she was leaving long, emotional voice messages for Rebecca, sometimes at 2 in the morning when she thought I was sleeping soundly in our bedroom. I started noticing behavioral patterns I'd somehow completely missed before, how she'd suddenly started taking her phone into the bathroom during her evening routine, something she'd never done in our entire 8 years together, and how she'd become unusually secretive about her social media activity, quickly closing apps whenever I walked into the room or angling her screen away from me while we watched television together on the couch. The change was subtle but absolutely unmistakable once I started paying closer attention to her daily habits. I decided to test Vanessa's actual commitment to our marriage by casually suggesting we renew our wedding vows for our upcoming 8th anniversary, thinking it would be a romantic gesture that any genuinely happily married woman would embrace enthusiastically without hesitation. I was thinking we could do something really special for our anniversary this year, I mentioned over dinner one evening while she was mindlessly scrolling through her phone instead of engaging in any meaningful conversation with me. Maybe renew our vows in front of both families? Make it a real celebration of what we've built together. Her reaction was immediate and absolutely telling. She looked up from her phone with what I can only describe as genuine panic in her eyes before quickly forcing an unconvincing smile. "Oh, that's sweet, honey, but don't you think that's a little excessive for 8 years? I mean, we're not celebrating our silver anniversary yet," she said with a nervous laugh that sounded forced, immediately deflecting the conversation toward our mundane weekend plans instead of engaging with the romantic gesture I'd suggested. During what I deliberately framed as a casual conversation about our respective college experiences a few nights later, I strategically mentioned Carter's name to gauge her emotional reaction, pretending I'd randomly remembered something about her past relationships. "I was just thinking about college the other day. Whatever happened to that Carter guy you dated back then? Didn't he end up going to medical school somewhere prestigious?" The immediate transformation in Vanessa's face was absolutely unmistakable. Her entire expression lit up with genuine excitement, fondness, and what looked like longing before she caught herself and tried desperately to play it off as simple nostalgic curiosity. "Oh, Carter? I honestly have no idea what he's doing with his life now. That relationship was so long ago, Marcus. Why would you even think about him after all these years?" But the damage was already done. I'd seen that unmistakable spark of genuine interest and emotional connection, that immediate positive response that she'd never displayed when talking about me, even during our early honeymoon phase when everything was supposedly perfect between us. The mysterious late-night phone activity continued and actually intensified, and I started noticing that Vanessa would sometimes disappear into our home office for 20 or 30 minutes at a time, claiming she was grading papers for tomorrow or planning next week's lessons. But I could clearly hear her voice through the door speaking in hushed, urgent, emotionally charged tones that definitely didn't sound like anything related to third-grade curriculum planning or educational activities. When I casually asked about the nature of her increasingly frequent conversations with Rebecca, Vanessa became immediately defensive and almost hostile. "We're sisters, Marcus. We talk about everything that's going on in our lives. It's not unusual or suspicious for us to have long, meaningful conversations." But there was something distinctly different in her tone, a guardedness and defensiveness that absolutely hadn't been there before, that made me realize these weren't ordinary sister chats about work stress, family gossip, or typical daily life concerns. Rebecca became increasingly uncomfortable with Vanessa's late-night confessions and emotionally charged voice messages about her growing marriage problems and detailed fantasies about Carter, and I learned this disturbing information through her husband James during what started as a casual conversation at our usual sports bar downtown. James and I had always gotten along exceptionally well since he married Rebecca 5 years ago, and we developed a genuine friendship that existed independently of our wives' sisterly relationship, often meeting for drinks and wings to watch games and discuss our respective work challenges in a relaxed environment. But this particular Thursday evening, James seemed unusually tense and distracted, nursing his beer slowly while clearly wrestling with something heavy he wanted to discuss but wasn't sure how to approach. "Marcus, I need to tell you something really important, but I'm honestly not sure how to bring this up without causing a complete family explosion that might destroy relationships permanently," he finally said during halftime of the basketball game we were supposedly watching, his voice heavy with obvious reluctance and genuine concern. Through James, I learned the devastating truth that Vanessa had been sending Rebecca increasingly detailed and emotional voice messages about how she'd essentially married me as nothing more than a safe rebound choice, after Carter broke up with her 8 years ago to focus entirely on his demanding medical residency program without any romantic distractions. She's been telling Rebecca night after night that she never really got over Carter, that she basically settled for you because she was absolutely terrified of being alone and you were stable, dependable, and conveniently available, James explained, looking genuinely uncomfortable about sharing this deeply personal information but clearly feeling like I deserve to know the complete truth about my marriage. "These aren't just typical casual complaints about normal marriage stress or temporary rough patches, Marcus. She's talking about you like you were some kind of consolation prize she reluctantly grabbed because her first choice wasn't available when she needed someone." Rebecca had confided in James that Vanessa had been spending countless hours methodically researching Carter online, systematically discovering that he'd successfully completed his prestigious cardiology residency at Johns Hopkins, was now working as a highly successful cardiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, had gone through what appeared to be an amicable divorce approximately 3 years ago with no children involved, and was apparently still single based on his carefully maintained professional social media profiles and public appearances. She knows exactly where he works, where he lives, what medical conferences he speaks at as a keynote presenter, what expensive restaurants he posts about on Instagram, even what luxury cars he drives, James said, shaking his head with obvious disgust and disbelief. Rebecca says Vanessa has basically become completely obsessed with tracking and monitoring his entire successful life from a distance, like some kind of digital stalker. The situation had escalated dramatically when Vanessa explicitly and directly asked Rebecca to help her figure out the best way to contact Carter without me having any knowledge about it, claiming she just wanted emotional closure from their college relationship, but Rebecca strongly suspected there were much deeper and more destructive romantic intentions behind this seemingly innocent request. Rebecca's been losing serious sleep over this entire situation because she knows damn well that Vanessa isn't actually looking for closure, James continued, his voice heavy with genuine concern for both me and his wife's emotional well-being. "She's actively looking for a way back into Carter's life, and she's asking Rebecca to be complicit in what's basically emotional cheating, if not something much worse." Rebecca had been keeping detailed records of all these disturbing conversations, feeling increasingly guilty and conflicted about keeping me completely in the dark about my wife's true feelings and her active plans to reconnect with her ex-boyfriend behind my back. "My wife has been carrying this horrible burden for weeks now, and it's absolutely eating her alive," James explained with obvious frustration. "She keeps saying you're a genuinely good guy who doesn't deserve to be living a complete lie, but she also doesn't want to be the person responsible for blowing up your marriage." The crushing weight of learning that my wife had not only never gotten over her college boyfriend but was actively planning to reconnect with him while lying directly to my face about our relationship hit me like a devastating physical blow, but I also felt a strange sense of validation that my growing suspicions and gut instincts had been completely justified all along. Rebecca decided she couldn't keep Vanessa's devastating secrets anymore and began planning what she called an intervention during their regular monthly family brunch at their parents' house in Memphis, a cherished tradition that had been happening for years where the entire extended family gathered every third Sunday for food, conversation, and catching up on everyone's lives. She deliberately invited me, Vanessa, their parents Margaret and Robert, and James, presenting it as just another normal family gathering where we'd eat Margaret's famous blueberry pancakes and discuss everyone's work updates, recent life events, and general family news. But she was actually planning to confront Vanessa about her emotional infidelity and ongoing deception in front of witnesses who could hold her accountable for her actions. Rebecca had been carefully and methodically saving all of Vanessa's incriminating voice messages as concrete evidence over the past several weeks, feeling increasingly guilty and conflicted about allowing me to remain completely in the dark about my wife's true feelings and her active plans to betray our marriage behind my back. "I can't stand watching Marcus live this complete lie anymore," she had told James the night before the planned confrontation, according to what he shared with me much later. "He deserves to know exactly what kind of person he married, and Vanessa needs to face real consequences for what she's been doing to him." James had tried to talk Rebecca out of such a dramatic public confrontation, suggesting they handle it privately, but Rebecca was determined that Vanessa needed to be held accountable in front of family members who had witnessed our entire relationship and would understand the magnitude of her betrayal. "She's been lying to everyone, not just Marcus," Rebecca had argued. "Mom and Dad think they have this perfect daughter who's happily married, when really she's been planning to cheat on her husband with her ex-boyfriend." The evening before the planned brunch confrontation, Rebecca called me around 9 o'clock with a cryptic and unsettling message that immediately put me on edge and made it completely impossible for me to sleep that night. "Marcus, I need you to know that some really important and difficult things are going to come to light tomorrow during our family brunch," she said, her voice clearly shaking with obvious nervousness and grim determination. "I can't give you specific details right now because I need to handle this situation properly and carefully, but just be prepared mentally for some very difficult conversations and revelations." When I pressed her for more concrete information about what exactly she meant by difficult conversations and revelations, Rebecca remained frustratingly vague but insisted with unusual urgency that it was absolutely crucial that I attend the family gathering. "Just promise me you'll be there tomorrow morning at 10. And try to prepare yourself mentally for hearing some things about your marriage that might be extremely hard to process and accept," she said before hanging up abruptly, leaving me anxious, confused, and completely unable to focus on anything else for the rest of the evening. I spent that entire sleepless night lying in bed next to Vanessa, who seemed completely oblivious to the emotional storm that was about to engulf our marriage, casually scrolling through her phone and occasionally chuckling at whatever content she was consuming while I stared at the ceiling wondering what devastating revelations Rebecca was planning to share with our entire family. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me that Vanessa was probably messaging Rebecca about Carter at that very moment while lying right next to me, completely unaware that her sister was about to expose everything she'd been hiding and destroy the carefully constructed facade of our marriage. During the family brunch the next morning, Rebecca dramatically played Vanessa's voice messages on speakerphone in front of everyone, revealing my wife's detailed confessions about dreaming of Carter, feeling trapped in our marriage, and wanting to reconnect with her ex-boyfriend behind my back. The morning had started normally enough, Margaret bustling around the familiar kitchen preparing her signature blueberry pancakes with fresh berries from her garden, Robert reading interesting sections of the Sunday newspaper aloud to anyone who would listen, and James helping set the dining room table with the good china while Vanessa and I made polite small talk about our respective work weeks and tentative weekend plans, completely unaware of the emotional devastation that was about to unfold. In this comfortable family setting, we were all seated around the familiar oak dining table that had hosted countless family celebrations over the years, sharing lighthearted stories about work and passing around heaping plates of food, when Rebecca suddenly stood up with her phone clutched tightly in her hand and announced with obvious determination, "Before we continue with our meal, there's something really important that everyone in this room needs to hear." The room fell into immediate and uncomfortable silence as Rebecca's expression turned deadly serious and grimly determined, her hands visibly shaking as she prepared to detonate what she knew would destroy our family gathering. "Vanessa has been sending me extremely detailed voice messages for weeks about her marriage and her true feelings, and I genuinely think Marcus deserves to know exactly what his wife really thinks about their relationship and their future together." Before anyone could object, ask questions, or try to stop what was happening, Rebecca pressed play on the first message, and Vanessa's voice filled the room with devastating and unmistakable clarity. "Becca, I honestly can't keep pretending anymore. I dream about Carter every single night, and I wake up every morning wishing I was lying next to him instead of Marcus. I think I made a terrible, life-altering mistake marrying someone I never really loved the way I loved Carter." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening, and I watched Vanessa's face turn completely white with shock and panic as she realized exactly what was happening and how thoroughly she was being exposed. But Rebecca wasn't finished with her systematic destruction of Vanessa's carefully constructed lies. She methodically played message after message, each one more psychologically damaging than the last. I only married Marcus because I was absolutely terrified of being alone after Carter chose his medical career over our relationship. Vanessa's voice continued from the phone speaker with brutal honesty. Marcus is stable and financially secure, but he's definitely not the love of my life. Carter is and always has been. I've been secretly researching him online for months, and I know he's divorced and single now. I keep obsessively thinking about reaching out to him and seeing if we could possibly have a second chance at what we should have had. The most devastating and personally destructive message came next, delivered in Vanessa's voice with an intimacy and passion that she'd never shown when talking about me. Marcus is genuinely a good guy, but I feel like I'm living someone else's completely wrong life every single day. When I close my eyes and imagine my future, it's with Carter in Boston living in his beautiful condo, not here with Marcus planning our boring suburban existence in this dead-end town. I think constantly about Carter's hands on my body, his deep voice saying my name, the way he used to make me feel completely alive and desired. Marcus has never made me feel that way, not even during our honeymoon phase when everything was supposedly perfect. Margaret dropped her coffee mug with a loud crash, sending ceramic pieces scattering across the hardwood floor, and Robert sat completely frozen with his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, while James stared intensely at his plate in obvious discomfort and embarrassment. The relentless messages included Vanessa admitting with disturbing detail that she'd been systematically following Carter's social media accounts under multiple fake names, that she'd obsessively fantasized about showing up unannounced at his hospital in Boston, and that she'd already drafted several carefully worded emails to him but hadn't had the courage to actually send them yet. I know it's morally wrong and completely unfair to Marcus, but I absolutely can't stop thinking about what my entire life would be like if I just waited patiently for Carter to finish his demanding residency instead of pathetically settling for the first decent guy who showed genuine interest in me. Her voice continued from the speaker, each word hitting me like a devastating physical blow to my chest and stomach. Vanessa broke down sobbing uncontrollably when the final and most damning message played, where she explicitly and desperately asked Rebecca to help her contact Carter. I really need your help figuring out exactly how to reach out to him without Marcus ever finding out what I'm doing. I know it probably sounds completely crazy and selfish, but what if Carter still has romantic feelings for me after all these years? What if we could actually be together now that we're both older, more mature, and he's fully established in his successful medical career? Our parents sat in stunned and horrified silence, Margaret's hand covering her mouth in complete shock while tears streamed down her cheeks, while James shifted uncomfortably in his chair and Rebecca stood there with tears streaming down her own face, clearly devastated by having to expose her sister so brutally but absolutely determined to reveal the truth that had been eating her alive. I remained eerily calm during the entire systematic revelation, having strongly suspected something was fundamentally wrong after overhearing the anniversary party conversation weeks earlier, but the detailed extent and cruel specificity of Vanessa's deception and emotional betrayal still hit me with unexpected psychological force, making me realize with absolute clarity that our entire 8-year marriage had been built on elaborate lies and her desperate fear of being alone rather than any genuine love or respect for me as a person. After the disastrous brunch confrontation that had exposed everything, Vanessa and I drove home in complete and suffocating silence, with her crying uncontrollably the entire 40-minute journey from Memphis while I processed everything I'd learned about our marriage being built on fundamental lies, deception, and her desperate fear of being alone. The car ride felt absolutely endless, punctuated only by Vanessa's increasingly hysterical sobbing and occasional desperate attempts to speak that dissolved into more tears before she could form any coherent words or explanations, while I focused mechanically on driving and tried to process the devastating reality that the woman I'd shared a bed with for 8 years had never actually loved me the way I'd completely and wholeheartedly loved her. At home, sitting in our living room that suddenly felt like a stranger's house filled with meaningless shared memories, Vanessa finally admitted the complete and unvarnished truth about our entire relationship. She had never genuinely gotten over Carter even for a single day. She had deliberately and calculatedly settled for me out of fear and loneliness rather than any authentic love. And she had indeed been actively planning to contact Carter to see if there was still a romantic chance for them to be together after all these years. I know this is going to sound absolutely terrible and selfish, but I need to be completely honest with you now that everything's been exposed, she said through her tears, her voice barely above a whisper as she struggled to maintain eye contact. I never stopped loving Carter, not for one day in our entire marriage. When he broke up with me to focus completely on his medical residency, I was absolutely devastated and terrified of being alone forever. So when you showed genuine interest in me just a few months later, I convinced myself that settling for someone stable and kind was better than facing the possibility of being by myself indefinitely. The confrontation escalated dramatically when I demanded to see her phone and discovered that Vanessa hadn't just been fantasizing about contacting Carter, she had actually already drafted several carefully worded and emotionally charged emails to him over the past few weeks but had been too frightened to send them, and she'd been systematically following his social media accounts under an elaborate fake name for months, studying his daily life and professional schedule like some kind of obsessed stalker with unlimited time and dedication. I created a fake Instagram account called Nashville_teacher_27, so I could follow him and see his posts without him knowing it was me watching his every move, she admitted with obvious shame, showing me her phone with dozens of screenshots of Carter's posts that she'd been obsessively saving and analyzing. I know exactly where he works, when he's on call at the hospital, what medical conferences he attends as a speaker, what expensive restaurants he posts about, even what coffee shop he goes to before his early morning shifts. The level of premeditation, deception, and systematic stalking was absolutely staggering. She'd been living a completely double life for months while I naively believed we were building something real and meaningful together. Vanessa begged me desperately for forgiveness and claimed with obvious panic that she wanted to work seriously on our marriage, insisting frantically that the public confrontation had made her realize how much she stood to lose, but I could see clearly through her desperate panic to the ugly truth. She was only saying these things because she'd been caught and publicly exposed, not because she was genuinely committed to me or had any real desire to rebuild our relationship. Please don't give up on us, Marcus. I can change completely, I can learn to love you the way you deserve to be loved, she pleaded desperately, reaching for my hands while I instinctively pulled away from her touch. I was confused and living in the past, but I see now that what we have is real and worth fighting for. But her words felt completely hollow and desperate, the frantic promises of someone who'd been caught in elaborate lies rather than the genuine remorse of a wife who actually wanted to rebuild trust and commitment with her husband. I filed for divorce within a week of the devastating Brunch revelation, and during the complex legal proceedings that followed, I learned through my attorney that Vanessa had eventually worked up the courage to contact Carter, who politely but firmly declined her desperate advances because he was actually in a serious committed relationship with a fellow physician that hadn't appeared on any of his public social media profiles that she'd been obsessively monitoring. My lawyer informed me that Vanessa's attorney had disclosed this embarrassing information during the discovery phase, apparently hoping it would demonstrate to the court that her infatuation with her ex-boyfriend was completely over and she was finally ready to focus genuinely on our marriage, but it only confirmed my decision to end things permanently and move forward with my life. The bitter irony was absolutely devastating. She'd systematically destroyed our 8-year marriage chasing a romantic fantasy that was never going to become reality anyway, sacrificing something real and stable for an impossible dream that existed only in her imagination. Vanessa moved back to Memphis to live temporarily with Rebecca and James, but their previously close sisterly relationship became severely strained and uncomfortable because of the dramatic and publicly humiliating way the truth had come out during the family brunch, and Rebecca felt overwhelming guilt about the nuclear approach she'd taken to exposing her sister's elaborate lies. I knew the truth had to come out eventually, but I honestly didn't expect the fallout to be this destructive for everyone involved, Rebecca told me during one of our final conversations before I moved on completely. Vanessa barely speaks to me now, and our parents are really struggling to process how they completely missed all the obvious signs that their daughter was living such an elaborate double life. Margaret called me several times during the lengthy divorce proceedings to apologize profusely for Vanessa's inexcusable behavior and express how genuinely shocked and disappointed she was to learn about her daughter's systematic deception and emotional betrayal. We raised her to be honest, loyal, and committed, Marcus. I honestly don't understand how she could treat you this way after 8 years of what we thought was a happy marriage. 6 months after the divorce was finalized and I'd started rebuilding my life, I met Angela at a medical technology conference where my company was presenting new software solutions for healthcare providers, and she turned out to be a highly skilled nurse practitioner working in cardiology who was genuine, refreshingly straightforward about her feelings and intentions, and completely honest in every interaction we had from our very first conversation. Angela was everything Vanessa had never been: emotionally available, genuinely interested in building something real and lasting together, completely transparent about her past relationships without any hidden agendas or unresolved romantic feelings for ex-boyfriends, and most importantly, she made it clear that she was choosing me deliberately rather than settling for me out of fear or convenience. I really appreciate that you are completely upfront about your divorce and what you learned from it, she told me during our third date while we walked through downtown Nashville. I was married before too when I was younger, and I learned that absolute honesty from the very beginning is the only way relationships can actually work long-term. With Angela, I finally understood what it genuinely felt like to be someone's authentic first choice rather than their backup plan or safety net, to be with someone who chose me deliberately and enthusiastically rather than settling for me out of fear or loneliness. The contrast between my relationships was absolutely remarkable. Where Vanessa had consistently made me feel like I was constantly competing with a ghost from her past, Angela made it crystal clear that I was exactly who she wanted to be, with no comparisons or reservations or secret fantasies about other men. The story ends with me reflecting on how Rebecca's brutal honesty, though initially painful and publicly humiliating, had ultimately saved me from potentially years more of living a complete lie and constantly wondering why my wife seemed emotionally distant and distracted during what should have been the happiest and most fulfilling years of our marriage.